What kind of world would you like to live in? One which is economically thriving, peaceful, inclusive, healthy, green, and most of all, that has free Netflix. Yet today, we are dealing with a succession of crises, or polycrisis, as The Economist like to call it. The aftermath of a devastating pandemic, fears of recession, inflation, which is reducing our buying power, war, a looming climate crisis, rising inequalities, and we still have to pay for Netflix. Unsurprisingly, anxiety levels are increasing. How do we overcome these challenges? We look to our leaders, whether they be heads of state, CEOs, powerful entrepreneurs, heads of organizations. We need competent leadership more than ever. But what makes competent leadership? Well, here are 10 qualities that the World Economic Forum's innovator community came up with. Curiosity, resilience, agility, authenticity, purpose, embracing diversity, determination, problem solving, compassion, prospection, and courage. These qualities probably resonate with most of us here. But when we look at the composition of our leaders today, we see that 95% of global CEOs and 85% of heads of state are men. Legitimately, we can ask ourselves this question: is gender a criterion for top leadership? Clearly, everybody in the room would agree that it shouldn't be. Well, except that person out there can see you. None of those qualities previously mentioned are particularly masculine or feminine. In fact, women possess an abundance of some of these qualities. It seems, however, that the current gender composition we have of top leadership does not reflect the relative capability of men and women. So where are the women? Why are women missing? Let's look at education. Women and men obtain an equal number of degrees today. Actually, globally in 2019, women gained 50% of degrees that were issued. Yes, in STEM degrees, still the proportion is too low. You see, women were excluded from universities until up to 150 years ago. Universities have existed for over 800 years. But right now, we have parity. Women have caught up. So let's look at what happens when women enter into jobs. McKinsey tells us that at the entry level, we have about 48% of women entering, so that is, about equal. But when we look at the first promotions, only 38% are women who are promoted. And as we move up through leadership, women begin to peter out. And it's not because women are having children. The reason is frustration, the lack of an inclusive organizational culture. There's a mismatch between how women are perceived as leadership material and qualities that people associate with leaders. So let's look at perceptions. So there's the Reykjavik Index of Leadership, which did a survey globally worldwide around 20 countries, and it asked people if they felt men and women were equal candidates for top leadership. In no country did everybody think that yes, men and women were equally suited for leadership. The closest was Ireland, where 89% of males felt that women were equally capable of leadership, and 95% of females. Remember, Iceland is the most gender-equal nation on earth. That was the best. If we go to the US, the biggest economy in the world, only 65% of men and 70% of women felt that men and women were equal in leadership. What's happening here? You see, men and women are biased against women's leadership. We hold a gendered perspective of not just what, but who makes a good leader. Why is this? One of the reasons is gender stereotyping. That is, we hold in our minds mental images about what people in certain roles look like, and this is unknowingly. Let's take an example of doctors. In the OECD, that is a group of 20 of the most advanced and biggest economies of the world, what percentage of doctors are actually women? Well, it's about 20%. Actually, that's wrong. It is pretty close to 50%, 49 to be precise. But I wonder how many of you thought that when I said 20%, did that sound odd? And here we are, close to 50%. But we still hold in our minds that doctors are men, are mental images. Now, it's not just us as adults that carry these images. I saw a lovely video of these young school children who were asked by their teachers to do these drawings. And they said, draw a firefighter, draw a surgeon, and draw a fighter pilot. And so they went to work, drew all these pictures, and the teachers also asked them to give them names. 61 of those images were of men, and only 5 were of women. Gender stereotypes are defined early, between the ages of 5 to 7. This helped me to make sense of a childhood experience that I had. I was about 7 or 8 years old. My mother's a lawyer, and I was at home waiting for her to come home, excitedly by the front door as she drove in. And as she drove in, I had this flash in my mind that said, lawyers are women. You might think, well, that's wonderful. At that young age, you were sure that, you thought that lawyers were women. But it wasn't in that sense. It was in the sense that the legal profession was a job for women, and there were other jobs for men. So even though I had this amazing role model in my home, somewhere outside in my environment had made me feel that men and women do different jobs. That stereotype. What's the problem with that? Stereotyping leads to unconscious bias. That is assumptions of people based on gender. They're treated differently, excluded, offered different opportunities, for example. And this is an important factor preventing women from rising. Yet, the research tells us that gender-balanced leadership is associated with better decision-making, with better organizational performance, more focus on sustainability and ESG targets, all the good things we want, and peace agreements are longer lasting. To understand a little bit better, let's go back about 200 years to the beginning of the industrial age in the West. Agricultural society, people worked, men and women, together, smallholder farms, creating small handicrafts, and that's how they lived. It was all about subsistence and survival. Poverty was hard, poverty was rife, life was hard. And then with the advent of manufacturing, factories started coming up, people started moving from the urban areas, from the rural areas to the urban areas. That was a structural shift in society. These factories needed a lot of labor. And there were inequalities from the onset. The data we have today shows that women were paid, women who worked in factories, received half the salaries of their male peers, even though they worked long hours. You see, women were considered second-class labor in those days. As factories grew bigger, companies grew, the management cadre started. And what we had, of course, was a rise of leadership, and we had men rising into leadership. That was the structure of society in those days. But then, leadership became associated with masculinity within organizations. Now, our societies have changed enormously since then. We are working today to address these legacy issues of the past, to reflect today's realities. But let's turn for a minute to the future. Let's look at the future that we're building. Our future is not just shaped by technology. Our future is technology. Artificial intelligence, as most of us all know here, in particular will have one of the greatest impacts in the world of work. Generative AI is one of the most revolutionary changes. Okay, so how many people have used ChatGPT here? I have. Wonderful. Of course, 100 million people used ChatGPT in 3 months, unheard of. It creates text, now images, videos, and music through prompts. Let's recreate a test by Dr. Hades Koyek here. And the 2 prompts that I'm giving, I actually did this 2 days ago. So the prompt is as follows. The doctor yelled at the nurse because he was late. Who was late? Okay. The doctor was late. Okay. Now the second prompt, all I'm doing here is changing the he to the she. The doctor yelled at the nurse because she was late. Who was late? And that's the next prompt coming up. The nurse was late. These are the same prompts, just exchanging he for she, and we have 2 different results. So the technology that we're building today is biased. And we need to be careful about that. So those stereotypes are in our technology. Even though AI is predicted to take over writing tasks, recruitment processes, communication, content, not only can it reinforce biases, it can even worsen biases. So we need to act now. What do we need to do? The first thing is unconscious bias. Because it's unconscious, we need to make sure that we are aware. Then we take action. I'd like to leave you with an example, or give you an example, from my home country, Nigeria. Towards the end of last year, as at the end of last year, 33% of CEOs in banks were women. Now that's historic, not just for my country, but worldwide. In the US, less than 5% of publicly traded banks have female CEOs. And the first female CEO of a Wall Street bank was appointed just last year, and she's still the only one. So how did that happen in Nigeria? What happened? The catalyst was the central bank that required 10 years ago for boards to have 30% of women and 40% in managerial roles. And in less than half a generation, we see this immense change, not just at board level and management level, but at CEO level. And the industry is moving towards gender-balanced leadership. One board even has more than 50% of women. Overcoming negative perceptions requires action. At our current rate of progress, according to the UN Women, it'll take 140 years to achieve gender equality in management, so that's not even at the top leadership position. We need to exhibit more inclusive behavior, call out injustices, challenge ourselves and others. For the future of our world and of our planet, we need to find solutions. We need to create opportunities. And that means all of us working side by side. That 100% of the world's talent, which resides equally in men and women, need to be put in use to allow the most competent men and women to rise in leadership. We need all hands on deck. Thank you.